As already expected and leaked, Microsoft announced today that they continue to plan on being pretty much on every screen known to man, indicating handhelds, TVs with software included by manufacturers, and everywhere else they can be. So, as we all assumed, pretty much Xbox is going to be on everything. Sarah Bond, Phil Spencer, and Matt Booty sat down today to explain the situation going forward, and while much of this data was leaked, I want to break some of it down. In the last 2 weeks, as leaks exploded about Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment and Sea of Thieves coming to other systems, the pseudo-leakers started saying everything was, and the message began to get lost. What was a very continued idea to look at titles in their library and see if they would fit onto a Switch 2 or PlayStation system in the future, it turned into a mess with every single first-party title, day and date with the release of the Xbox. Neither were remotely true. From Gears of War to Halo to Fable, the message got out there that everything was up for sale. But these rumors turned into Xbox also leaving the hardware division, something that it seems like Microsoft was particularly a little prickly about. Last week, Phil Spencer and team did an internal meeting with staff promising that it's the same plan as before, and more importantly, Xbox has no plans to leave the hardware market, something we saw repeated in this podcast. In fact, there are hints that they plan to expand it. While the pseudo-leakers and pushers of their own leaker podcast went on apology tours before today's meeting, rolling back almost every single leak they had pretended to know about, the cycle for Xbox and Microsoft became a little clearer today. Microsoft explained under no uncertain terms that 4 titles are coming to other consoles, and they are not in any way, shape, or form Starfield or Indiana Jones, as referenced by leakers. Community-driven games that are over 1 year old and seem to have slowed down in sales are 2 of those titles, something I discussed on a prior podcast. 2 of the other games are smaller and aren't really considered the big platform exclusives, most likely the Pentiment style. Now, Phil made sure to point out that the money and revenue that they get from that might mean a sequel for those games initially on the Xbox and then later built out onto others. Phil stated clearly only 4 games have been chosen. No other games at this time have been looked at in any kind of fundamental way, and there will be no changes in any way to the Xbox library. Also, Sarah Bond restated that all Activision games will be on Gamepass day 1 and Diablo 4 is coming. They also stated again in this event that all games from Xbox will be on Xbox Game Pass day 1. Phil backed up this by also stating that since they're one of the largest publishers on Sony and Nintendo with all their companies anyway, it's not really a change to what's going on internally. Now, hardware in particular, they stated that we will see this holiday some kind of new hardware, and then later on they're going to show a massive leap, as Sarah called it, into hardware between the generations. She stated the largest jump between generations ever for their hardware that they're planning, which does go into some of the leaks that we've seen about a boutique particular bit of hardware that is going to be insanely powerful, most likely also backed up by a mid-level one for those with normal-sized wallets. Despite all the rigmarole and hemming and hawing, this has really just shined a light more on the terrible sourcing that occurs in gaming news and less about the actual gaming itself nor the real news. One thing that interests me here is that companies change, and while this change is Microsoft's plan now, that doesn't mean that if they don't do very well on their next hardware, they won't reverse course, something we've seen in other companies going back and forth. For example, Sony's come out many times in the form of their talking mouthpiece CEOs as well and stated generations are all that matter, streaming isn't real gaming, and that they believe in one platform's exclusivity. Now, years later, we even see Sony offering streaming, a subscription service, and their games rolling out on PC after initial time on their console, except for Helldivers 2, which is one of their best releases ever across 2 systems, PC and console day and date. Their CEO made it clear this week that business changes and the way the industry is moving is going to continue to require them to be more aggressive in multi-platform stances, and that's going to be required from them. Sony, like Microsoft, is facing a couple difficulties, and their CEO pointed out that while revenue was up 15%, profit was down 25.9%, and that was almost entirely from losses in the hardware sales. This is, of course, also connected to Sony's 12 live service games and what they want to do in the future. But back to Microsoft. Even more impactful news here is that Apple is dropping their prior refusal of allowing the Xbox Store and their ecosystem onto the iTunes Apple Store ecosystem. And at the end of January, they announced this. We're looking at Xbox finally getting fully onto that Apple ecosystem, something that absolutely was the main headlines prior to the FTC and Activision issues years ago, with Microsoft and Apple going back and forth on Twitter. While Sarah Bond with Microsoft wasn't happy with the fee tiers that Apple is instigating here, it seems to also aim directly at companies like Microsoft. Expect to see big movement there as Microsoft wants to hit it, something that they have talked about prior to all of the other rigmarole around Activision and Microsoft. they definitely wanted to get in on Apple and get that system on everything. This is all smart business, but it can lead those who believe everything a CEO says to feel a bit cold. So let me say something I've said many times before. Companies aren't saving babies for floods. No one's your friend. A AAA company isn't instantly bad, and an indie developer isn't instantly trying to only do right. Companies move forward and adjust or suffer demise, sinking into a slow quagmire of 1,000 cuts and a slow death if they don't make changes fast enough. And make no mistake, every company is seeing this. Just go no further than Nintendo's CEO talking here recently about changing up the way they're doing the Switch and the Switch 2. We really don't know what form factor that's going to be in, but they've made it very clear that their ideas are also changing. And to make a regrettable pun, another big switch is handhelds themselves, from the Switch 2 to Windows handhelds being made by every single random company in the world, from Kickstarter small companies to Lenovo and Asus. That's just icing on the cake. Switch 2 is coming soon, and rumors are that the power will be enough to see console games coming out day and date on the Switch 2 as well as the consoles. If that's true, and every indicator I'm hearing from third-party companies, that is going to change the way the entire market works. This is something that in the past just didn't happen as often because the Switch was such an underperforming hardware device. And now we're seeing something that can, at least for many of these games, offer something in the handheld market that is equivalent to the console versions that are coming out in the same form factor. Admittedly, while Microsoft's podcast today didn't offer much more than we already knew, and that's why it was in the podcast format, as major events and changes usually happen during streams and special events, it shouldn't be taken lightly that Microsoft has had these plans for years, and only now we're directly hearing from other companies who are doing the same, looking to put their content in as many places as possible. And that includes third-party devs wanting their game to be on handhelds and consoles and PCs, to first-party devs that want to offset hugely growing prices for game development and continue with long-tail sales down the road. While we discuss this on the Friday 10:30 Pacific Standard Time podcast in more depth, and you can jump in this week, I think it's pretty clear that Microsoft's podcast, Sony's comments this week, and Nintendo's as well, that all the companies are diversifying. That brings us to Microsoft's handheld and a long-rumored situation there, either internally developed or even possibly an OEM idea and system template that other hardware companies can build from. If you remember, this is how Microsoft handled WMR, their Windows Mixed Reality. They set the software, the ideals, and the hardware low specs, and then let other manufacturers like HP make the headsets. Luckily, while WMR is discontinued in the new Windows 11 update, VR and normal games and hardware don't share the same fate. VR is a platform on a platform, and it has an additional set of difficulties on top of it that a handheld just really wouldn't have. While Keystone, Microsoft's internal product and prototype streaming device that we saw on Phil's shelf a couple times during some interviews, saw the inevitable trash bin, it doesn't mean that Xbox isn't looking at TVs to continue to push the game services onto those as well. In the end, gaming is changing. What it means to be exclusive, multi-plat, and console-specific is drastically altering, and all three companies are heading into this next gen and further with changing plans from before. Peace out.